Over the years, I've played hundreds, if not thousands, of different games, and one lesson that I have learned over and over again is that reading the rules is no substitute for actually playing the game. More importantly, playing the game multiple times, because that really gives you a sense of what the game is about. And this lesson was brought home to me again after playing Musical Chairs, a game designed by Kelly North Adams and published by Rio Grande Games. This 2 to 4 player game plays in about 20 to 45 minutes, depending on the number of players in the game. Well, I published a designer diary by Kelly North Adams on Board Game Geek News, so I read it pretty closely. Editing the material, making sure everything flowed well, and integrating the pictures with it, I thought I had an understanding of how the game worked. Then I received a review copy from Rio Grande Games, read the rules again, said, oh, okay, I think I know how this works. Then actually started playing it. And that first time that you play a game, you're always playing from a position of ignorance, where you don't know exactly how things work going in, even though you have read the rules. It just happens over and over again, where things don't quite work out the way you thought they would, or you see how the consequences of actions in the early game play out in the later game, or you discover situations that you wouldn't have anticipated just from a reading of the rules. So then you play a second time, and now you're playing from a position of knowledge. You make different choices on how you're going to approach what you actually do in the game, and you're more fully playing the game. To help give an understanding of how this works, let me show you how this game works. Here are the components for Musical Chairs. You have a game board with 8 different chairs on it, each chair being a different color, and for each color or suit there are 11 cards numbered 1 to 10, as well as a rest card. In addition to those colored cards, there are 10 repeat cards that are white. Now the white, cream, there's a difference. You just have to be aware of that as you start to play. The gist of the game is that each player is going to take a pawn and put it in front of them to mark their color, and they place the others at locations around the board, and you are going to be playing cards collectively to the center of the table. And each time you play a card, you are going to move 1, 2, or 3 spaces around the board. So you move, play a card, move, play a card, and continue, generally in increasing order. You might skip numbers as you go along. We'll just leave the people here. We'll pretend they keep moving. But at a certain point, you can't play cards anymore. And then the music stops. So in Musical Chairs, you're moving around the chairs, and then the music stops. You see where you are. You are trying to land on valuable chair spaces, and the value of a chair space is determined by the cards that were played. So the pink player happens to end up at the pink space. They get to collect these pink cards. Again, the player being pink, the space being pink is just coincidence. So these cards are worth 4 points. Each card is worth 1 to 3 points as determined by the number of treble clefs on them. So the pink player collects the pink cards. In addition, for the color that you score, you get to score any cards from your hand that you wish that are below the top card that you collect. So this player collects a 9 as well as a 7, so they can score any pink cards from their hand that are lower than 9. So the pink player gets these 4 cards and puts them aside. The black player gets the red 2, but the player cannot score the red 4 from their hand because that is higher than 2. The blue player gets these green cards. Maybe they score green or maybe they don't. The white player gets nothing because there are no orange cards in the mix. So the value that you are going to score during a round depends on the cards that will be played and the location where you end up. That combination of card play and movement is at the heart of Musical Chairs. Now, that is not the entirety of the rules, but that's the thing to grasp before you do anything else. The point of the game, score the most points. How do you get points? Generally, by landing on chairs where there are valuable cards to score. Now, you don't know which colors are going to be valuable at the start of a round because you see only the cards in your hand, and those cards may not necessarily be played to the central pile because there are restrictions on what you can play. In general, the first player in a round is going to play the lowest chair card they have in their hand. They can play a rest or repeat card, but they don't have to. And I will say that many times over the course of this explanation. So they play a card down and they're going to move 1, 2, or 3 spaces. I'm going to ignore player movement because it's the same each time you play a card to the central row, move 1 to 3 spaces. You must play a card that is higher than 2, except in 3 situations. You can play a card that's the same number as what's there. So I can play another 2 on top, and again we'll move. I cannot play a 1 because a 1 is lower than 2. If I want, I can play a repeat card. A repeat card mimics what comes before, so this effectively is a yellow 2, and I'll move 1 to 3 spaces. So repeat only repeats what comes before. If you play a repeat to begin with, it's no color, it's no value, you just move 1 to 3 spaces, and then the next player can play whatever they want on top of that. So maybe we have a situation like this. The next player plays a 4. Again, they move. Maybe another player plays a 4. Maybe someone is not sure what they want to play. They're not sure where they want to move or where they want to go. So they choose to play a rest card. When you play a rest card, it just goes in front of you. It counts as a gray card. It's worth 1 point. But all it means is I'm skipping my turn. I'm not playing a card, but I'm also not ending the round. Okay. So when you're looking at the top pile, I can always play a repeat if I wish to repeat that color and value. I can play a card of the same value and move, just as I move when I play a repeat. I can play a rest and just sit my turn out. Or if I don't want to do one of those 3 things, I have to play the card in my hand that is lowest and yet higher than the top card. So if this were my hand of cards, I cannot play the 2 because the 2 is lower than a 4. I cannot play the 8 and 10 because I have a 7 that is my lowest card higher than a 4. So I play the 7, I move. We continue until someone cannot play legally because perhaps they have only these cards in their hand and there's an 8 on top. If they have a rest and repeat in their hand, they can choose to play the rest or choose to play the repeat, but they are not forced to. If they have an 8 in their hand, they can choose to play the 8, but they are not forced to. If you had a 10 in the hand or a 9, you would be forced to play at least the 9 or the 10 if you had only the 10. But again, you could still play the rest, repeat, or the 8. So at a certain point, if you're in this situation, you can choose to stop the music by not playing any of these 3 legally playable cards. You want to do that if you're in a location where you're going to score. In addition, when the music stops, you look at the color that's on top of the pile, the highest card that's most recently played, and that cushion is going to come off the chair. And that cushion can be claimed by a player on that space. So if the white player could choose to play, they might still not want to, because in addition to scoring this 8, they will score any orange cards in their hand if they wish that are lower than 8. And they can also purchase this cushion card by paying any single card from their scoring pile, some of which are worth no points and some of which are worth more. Each of these tiles is worth 0 to 3 points, and it gives you a special power for the remainder of the game. If no one was on this orange space, that cushion would just stay there and no one would buy it. But if the white player is here, they can buy it by paying any card. And this specifically says you may score a different vacant chair space. So if this player acquires this power in future rounds, depending on wherever they stop, they may score a different vacant chair space. They don't just score yellow, they could score, in this case, cream or blue or black or gray, in addition to yellow or orange. There's no one there either. So it opens up a lot of possibilities, and it costs you only 1 card from your score pile in order to get it. Some of the powers are more valuable than others. Those typically tend to be the ones that are worth fewer victory points to begin with. This one is worth 1 point for every different suit that you have in your score pile at the end of the game. There's 8 suits, so it's worth at least 1 point because you scored cards to initially get this. Could be as much as 8. This one, you have a larger hand size. Now you have 9 cards instead of 8, which gives you more options during the game. This, all your 0-point cards, which are the 1s, are now going to be worth 2 points. And it's a point on its own. It's okay. It's not great. You may immediately stop the music 1 time during the game. That's it. This is 3 points on its own, but it's a super powerful one-shot use where you end the round where you wish, where it's most profitable for you. Perhaps everyone else gets nothing. It's extremely good power. This one, you get +1 during butt battles, and you win ties. What are butt battles, you ask? Well, if you have played musical chairs, then you have some idea of how this will work. When the music stops in musical chairs, everyone races to get in a chair. There's one fewer chairs than the number of people, so of course someone's going to get left out. So if someone else is going for the same seat as you, you're trying to get your fanny in there first. Try to push them out of the way so that you end up as the proper owner of that seat, and they end up on the floor. You do this in the game as well. Let's say the round ends at this point with blue and white on their own on the yellow and red spaces. They will score those cards with no competition. No one else is here fighting for these chairs. They will grab these cards, and if they can and want to, they will score cards from their hand of the same color of lower value. Pink and black, however, are fighting over the valuable blue position that not only has these 3 cards in it worth 5 points, but also this cushion, because the cushion comes off the board because blue was the final color played. Who is going to win that seat? Well, they effectively play a little game of war with cards that remain in their hand. So each of them chooses a card, they reveal them simultaneously. Whoever plays the higher value will claim that color. In this case, one played a 10, one played a repeat. Well, repeats the 10, so there's a tie. They each choose another card from their hand, reveal them simultaneously, and the 9 wins. Let's say that's the black player in this place. The pink player can just lie down and cry. They get nothing. The black player gets these 3 cards. They score any other blue cards from their hand. They can spend a card to buy this, which, sure, I just spent a card that costs 1 point to get a card that costs 2 points, or worth 2 points, and my hand size will now be larger. Good job me, bad job you. And then we stand up and clear these cards out and start the next round. At the end of a round, you can choose to keep the remaining cards in your hand and refill your hand to 8 by drawing from the top of the deck, shuffling the discards if necessary to form a new deck, or you can choose to throw out everything. You can't keep any of those cards. It's all or nothing. And then draw 8 new cards from the deck to start afresh in the next round. Each round, 1 cushion is going to be removed, in general, based on the highest value card that has been played to the central row. If that color has already had its cushion removed, whether or not someone has purchased that cushion, then you look at the next highest card. So if green is the topmost card, but the green cushion is already off the board, then you go to the next. Maybe it's blue. If that's been claimed, go to yellow, and so forth. Whatever down that line until a cushion is removed, or if the remaining colors are not present in that row, if the red and the gray have not been played and those are the only cushions left, then they are not claimed. This is what the rules state. There's a reminder card in the game as well that states you go in clockwise order and pull the next cushion from the board. I'm not sure which to believe. I would go with the rules because it creates more interesting gameplay in that the game will not necessarily last 8 rounds. Players can choose possibly to end a round by playing a card to ensure that a cushion will be removed from the board, or possibly not play a card in order for that cushion not to be removed. Now, this gets into the larger elements of the game. You have an overview of how the game works. You want to land on valuable spaces based on the value of the cards that have been played. However, you don't choose where you start a round, except for the first round of the game. I'll mention something about that in a moment. And you don't choose which cards are in your hand. Sometimes you don't even choose which cards you can play, because if you're the first player, you play the lowest card in your hand, unless you play a rest or repeat. After that, if you choose not to repeat a number or play a rest or repeat, then you must play the lowest card in your hand that is higher than the card in the pile. So you may be forced to play something. So when you get your hand of cards for the round, whether in the first round or any later round, you're trying to have some idea of what could be valuable to you. but it's really difficult to know that. I've played the game only 3 times so far, twice with 2 players, once with 4 players. 2 players, you obviously have a lot more control because there's only one person playing before you play again, which means you have a better idea of which cards are going to end up in that pile and how quickly the round will progress. In the 4-player game, we would have a round sometimes where someone would play 4 and the next player would play a 6 and then someone plays a 9 and then boom, we're done. I thought I would have at least one more turn to play, maybe even 2, as we're circling around the table, but instead, whoop, music stops and we score, and possibly I am somewhere where there's not anything scoring because I had plans to move to a different color. So the game changes a lot based on the number of players in the game as well as the cards that you have in hand. And although I played 3 times with each game lasting at least 8 rounds, I still feel like I'm just getting a grasp on the flow of how the game works and how to play better. How to assess a hand to begin with and what you're actually trying to do. Now, a lot of it can be seeing what cards people play and what cards flow through, and so you're trying to picture what's been played and what's left in the deck and what could possibly be in people's hands. That's a lot to track in a game. If you're going to track 98 cards going through and what's been played and removed from the game, and then sometimes it's brought back into the deck by someone discarding a card in order to buy a cushion so that card comes back in, it's ridiculous. I can't imagine keeping track of that all, but I can imagine getting better at assessing the value of a hand and what you can possibly do with it and how many rounds, how many turns you might actually be able to play cards before the round ends. It's hard to get a value. I mean, I generally prefer to play a game many, many times before I talk about it, but here I am, only 3 plays, and giving an initial assessment for how it works. So I'm really curious to do more, but here's my understanding to begin with. Right? There's a lot of randomness, it feels, because you don't know how long the round is lasting or what's going to be there or what value things have, so you're kind of taking a shot in the dark and moving around and trying to leave yourself open to go to different places. You often want to keep the rest cards because they let you pause where you already are, but they have much more value when the pile is moving up higher in numbers because possibly the round ends before it gets back to you and you get to stay someplace valuable. Or you want to rest early so that you can see which colors become valuable and then you can play into it later. Maybe you have really low numbers and then a whole bunch of high numbers, but you don't want to jump to the high numbers yet so you can see where things go. The repeat cards are incredibly valuable because they let you play and move on top of something that was already played previously, so you're adding to the value of a color that already has value, ideally ending up where that color is so that you can score it at the end of a round, maybe, or so that you can play beyond what other players think you could play. If someone advances to 10, you can only play on top of it with a 10 or a repeat, and maybe you can come out there with a repeat and then get somewhere, some location, and ideally be somewhere valuable. Or battle someone. Battling is interesting just because it's an all or nothing affair, and you don't necessarily have a choice over whether you're going to battle someone. You might have set yourself up for a great scoring opportunity, and then someone just boom, boom, comes in right next to you, and now you have to fight them. Did you prepare that? Can you prepare for that? Not necessarily, because again, in some cases you are forced to play cards, so you might have been forced to play that 10, and now the best card you have in your hand is a 6, and maybe you just lose it. That's what happens. So there's a lot of luck and randomness in the game in terms of the cards you get and what becomes valuable in a round, just based on what everyone is doing. So it's this interesting collective feel for how the game progresses through each round, and you're just trying to nibble out some points round over round in order to score. Although you also want to shoot for the cushions because those often have special abilities that can be incredibly valuable over the course of multiple rounds. One of the cushions is score the top card off the top of the deck at the end of each round. So if you get that early, possibly you will receive many, many points off of it. In the 2 games that cushion has been in play, it's come off the board in the final round. So it only scores in that final round that someone takes it. So it hasn't been valuable. It's really hard to set up where the endpoint will be because you don't know which color is going to end up on top at the end of a round. So there's a lot of random elements coming into play. I keep feeling like surely with more experience, I can do a better job of assessing my hand and where I want to be and where I'm going to go and where I want to end up. But initially, I'm just playing in the dark, moving things around, whistling in the dark, sure, and then the whistle stops and I grab a chair. And that brings up one element with the rules, well, 2 elements with the rules. So one, the rules mention that the person who has the best, I think, musical talent should be the first player. And then you are going to choose seats in reverse player order. And I would argue that people should just put stuff out at random. There should be places marked and you just put your thing there because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter mostly because if this is your first game, you have no idea what you're doing. And at the end of a round, you start wherever you ended the previous round. So effectively, your starting position relative to your hand is often random. So why not have that randomness on the very first turn instead of having this false choice, as if it matters where you started that first round? Maybe I'm speaking from ignorance here where it really does matter. But I taught the game to one person, played a 2-player game. I taught it to 2 other people, and we played a 4-player game. Those 2 other people really worried over why should I start here rather than here? Why should I do that? It doesn't matter. Just go somewhere. Do something. You'll learn only by doing. And maybe you'll learn that it doesn't matter because you'll probably play a couple of cards which gives you 6 different places that you can possibly end up. 5 places, since you have to move once, twice. You'll have a range of places to end up, so maybe it doesn't even matter. So why push that choice on people if it doesn't matter? Let people focus on the more important things and stress that more, where you have to end up on valuable colors, and hopefully you can suss out what those colors will be over the course of a round and have time to react to that in order to move to those locations. So that's one element with the rules. The other element with the rules is that they seem far wordier than they need to be. And I think the rules, they're not long, it's not complex, it's not a complex game, but things seem way longer. This section here talking about which cushion to grab seems like it could be far more condensed. Each cushion that's described, it says that it's worth 0 VP or 1 VP or 2 or 3 VPs in parentheses after it, but then it also has a line in each of these that says this token also gives the player an additional 3 victory points at the end of the game. You didn't have to say that because right here it says 3 VP. If you have a question, change that to say worth 3 VP, and then you remove that line. And everything looks a lot cleaner and simpler and easier to grasp. There's not so much wordage that just spills out on you and makes it more difficult to focus on the actual important element of the game. The cushions seem like they should sort of be this afterthought that you can refer to them when you need them, and instead they seem twice as long compared to what they should be. And that's the case for a lot of the rules, where it seems like things could have been streamlined more while still getting the point across for how things work. It's an interesting challenge trying to teach someone the game from the rules and not have them get lost, answer all the questions that people might have, so you have to anticipate what those questions will be, and address it in a streamlined way that ideally will get them playing the game as soon as possible. It's an incredibly tough challenge, but I think it can be done. And I think the rules would have benefited from a cleaning up with about a third of this text stripped out of here, with a focus then on what you're trying to do. Get the most points by landing on the colors that are going to be valuable based on the cards that everyone plays in a round. Start with that core and then build from there on rest, repeats, playing the same number. Those are optional, but in general, you're going to think of everything rising, the tension rising, and then whoop, music stops. Where are you? What do you get?